So good morning, good afternoon. No good afternoons here. Good morning and good evening to everyone. And thank you for joining the session. More people will join in as we speak. That's been our experience. But most of the speakers, some of the speakers are here today. I'm going to be requesting Professor Solano, who's on the International Advisory Board for QATCI, to lead the session. He kindly agreed to it. And the topic that we are discussing today is unique and rare areas, right? And in quantum. Now, that's a very subjective. So there's a little bit of leeway that we have in going into different spaces. But essentially, we're not discussing the usual stuff that gets discussed on a regular basis. So over to you, Professor Solano. Thank you so much for agreeing to handle the session, manage this session on behalf of QATCI.
Thanks, Rina. That's an honor, and I will be glad to tease all our top inviters and also the audience that is always exclusive. So should I start? Should we wait a couple of minutes?
I think it's 10:36. People, I think we can start since the session is being recorded, and then you could. In the meantime, that gives me an opportunity to poll the speakers at least, because they have all committed to joining. So let me see what happens.
Okay, so Rina, would you mind introducing briefly your guests? I can introduce Clarice and Salvatore, and you perhaps can introduce Kasturi Saha and Umakant Rapol.
So what I would recommend is that, we do a round of introductions as always. Let me introduce myself. I'm Rina Dayal. I head the Quantum Ecosystems and Technology Council of India. We are doing a series of roundtables around topics relevant to quantum. At the end of these roundtables, we will be collating notes, and from which we hope some interesting recommendations are going to come out, which will be shared with all stakeholders. Stakeholders for us in QATCI are everybody in the ecosystem: government, industry, academia, startups, investor community, and so on. And so that's my introduction. And over to you, Kasturi.
Yeah, hello, good morning and good evening to all of you. So thank you, Rina, for this invitation. I'm Professor Kasturi Saha. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering in IIT Bombay. And I set up a lab, experimental lab based on ND centers in Diamond in 8th year. And first to be in the country to focus on magnetometry and sensing and quantum sensing. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks. Shyam, perhaps?
Yeah, hi, I'm Shyam. I run a deep tech venture fund called Bharat Innovation Fund. So we focus on Series A investments in deep tech. So companies developing IP from India, global IP from India. So our investments have been across sectors, not specific to one space. So we've got investments in areas like emotion AI, AI and cybersecurity, advanced biotech, so prostate cancer, breast cancer drug development, bunch of areas where there is a strong IP, computer vision, robotics. So looking for companies developing global IP from the country and backing them with anything from a couple of million up to $5 to $10 million. So.
Excellent. And I think, Rohini, you don't need introduction if you want to say something of your position in Microsoft.
No, nothing special. I'm just CTO at Microsoft India, just looking to learn. Thank you.
Okay, so Clarice, briefly, you can mention your wonderful activities also in UCLA before your speech.
Yes, so I lead the Quantum Biology Tech or Qubit Lab at UCLA, and I investigate putative quantum effects in biological systems using quantum-inspired instrumentation. I also direct the UCLA Quantum Biology Center, whose mission is to advance and do some community building in this nascent field of quantum biology.
Wonderful. And Salvatore?
So thank you for the invitation. And I am a full professor of theoretical condensed matter physics in Italy at the University of Messina. I have a rather long career in quantum optics and in particular in cavity QED, including circuit QED. So this is my main stuff. And in the last year, I also I'm working also in collaboration with Kike on something which goes beyond the physics as we mean it, and I will speak about this new activity now.
Perfect. Okay, so let us start then. I will make a first introduction of a couple of minutes, and then I will let the guests of the roundtable to use 5 minutes as we agreed to present a little in more extension their weird activities in quantum, and then we can open the session and the floor for discussions. I kindly accepted. First of all, I am a member of the International Advisory Board of QATCI, no? Essentially because I am a worldwide observer, practitioner, and driver of quantum computing and quantum technologies, and I am very well linked to different quantum ecosystems. And I think this is the right way, and the enthusiasm and openness and creativity of Rina and the team is impressive, and I'm very, very proud to be involved, and I'm trying to participate as much as I can, essentially because I have also a strong trust in India as a potential. I think not only me, we are in huge admiration of all the potential that has always been displayed, be from mathematics, computer science, technology, automotive, and many top stuff. But also, now I will mention, without entering into science fiction, that it is well known in India by these Bollywood activities, that it's, I think, a multi-billion business, that people see it only as films, but it is a huge technology and development behind. And when Rina told me that there will be a session of a kind of uniqueness in quantum technologies, almost rareness, whatever is by side the mainstream, you know, I said, oh, that's me, right? I feel me fully identify with the philosophy of that, and of course to be discussing and introducing such a wonderful team. Before allowing Clarisse to start with her speech, there is no need of slides. If you want slides, you present, but the speech is enough as a teaser of the discussion, and I will ask you later specific questions. I wanted to explain to you all that even though we all follow the news on a daily basis, not only in LinkedIn or in Twitter, but in different social networks, magazines, and the quantum ecosystems are burgeoning around the world, there may be, and I am the first one to constantly be trying to open the eyes of the community, there is a certain dominance of a single-minded approach in quantum. And that's essentially where this session tries to break and to say there is much more, there are many opportunities, and India as a huge country also should display diversity, not only focused on one thing, right? So we are here to break this mentality that there is only quantum computing. That's not true. With Kasturi, we will see that there is quantum sensing. It looks like there is only superconductors in the game at cryogenic temperatures. Kasturi will show us how NV centers may work at room temperature, for sure also at 4 Kelvin if you need more precision or single shot readout, and not only for quantum computing, this can also be used as sensors. There may be edges to connect this to something that is related to geology or also to space activity. Is quite a diverse thing, and you don't need millions of qubits to do that. You know, these are things that could be done now. And Clarice will illustrate us that there is a bunch of things that relates biology to quantum, not because we believe, like some people may think that, oh, the brain has to be quantum because of free will issue. There is more formal and more also creative ways of building from not only from, let's say, healthy speculation, but also from experiments. And that's where Clarice also excels, and she will tell us more. The case of Salvatore is pretty amazing because even though he comes from a strong background in condensed matter, in quantum optics, and in quantum physics, he has also this soul of artist and technologist, and he created an association that is called InsightArt that is really driving and striving into connecting art and aesthetics to quantum physics and quantum computing, and also related to this crypto space and the blockchain, which is also something pretty new. Shyam, I don't know much your activities, but also you are kindly invited to join the discussion, and the people that will join later. So Clarice, I will start with you.
Kiki, can I ask something? I was going to suggest if it would be possible for Kasturi to start, because she's going to tell the beginning of my story.
Ah, okay, wonderful. Kasturi,
Awesome.
You are kindly invited.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Clarice. I'll share my screen actually. So if that's okay. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Are you able to see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so thank you, Clarice. And yeah, so I will talk about my work related to quantum technologies with NV centers in Diamond. And to give you a very brief sort of snapshot of what we are doing, we are focusing on this particular system, which is called NV centers, which is a defect, which is a color defect in diamond. So this is a nitrogen, which is a substitutional atom in the lattice of diamond, and replacing a carbon atom. And if you have a vacancy next to it, it forms this NV, and it can have different kinds of charge states. And NV minus is the one that we are interested in, because that has all sorts of very nice properties, which will behave not only like a qubit, but also because of the system, the electronic structure, which I don't want to go here in detail. The interesting thing is that the level structure allows you to probe temperature, magnetic field, electric field, strain, etc. So this is a fantastic system where not only can you harness it for a quantum computing kind of an system where it's a single qubit if you choose one of these levels, or you can also extend it into a 2-qubit system with its electron spin and a nuclear spin associated with it. But you can also do all sorts of these sensing applications, and that's where this system as a room temperature system opens up the potential for using it for variety of quantum sensing applications. And there have been, the past decade really has shown that you can apply it for, biological systems. And that's what Clarice will actually talk about. And it's also very, very interesting that you can use this system to probe spin photon dynamics, because you're measuring the system with photons, but in it is the spin qubit itself. So you really can do many, many things with it. One of the things that we crucially focus on is trying to go from a tabletop system to a more portable system, because ultimately, if you really want to build a technology, is something that should be, a handheld device is a more useful device to have, because then you can actually take it around and move it and do all sorts of measurements. And so we are focusing on, some of these sort of portable magnetometer applications, trying to work on the peripheral electronics, because ultimately whenever you want to build a quantum system, you have to work with a whole bunch of electronics, which is ultimately classical, and learning how to control these classical units is as important as learning how to control the actual quantum system. So we work a lot on the peripheral electronics, trying to shrink everything down so that we can build a peripheral, a small portable system. So that's one focus of my group, and the other focus is, of course, the standard kind of, the quantum computing applications, where we want to understand how to control the qubits, how to look into spin photon interactions, and for that, some of the best methods is actually to look into, classical, or rather traditional quantum optics, where you want to understand how photonic crystal cavities or pillars, etc., can interact with single spins, and that will give you the advantage of not only having this, the spin information, but also have photon information, which you can then take it away in a chip and use it for different other applications. So these are some of the examples, and one of the primary things that we focus on, and that's what I'm going to tell you about, is essentially quantum sensing. So the way we do quantum sensing is to use the two-level system, which basically the levels move when you apply an external magnetic field. And by quantifying the shift of the resonances, we can understand how much the levels have moved and how much magnetic field has been applied externally. So as you can imagine, there are a whole bunch of magnetic materials around, and there is no dearth of such applications where you can really potentially probe. And one of the few things that we have chosen, because this is a room temperature system, is actually a medical device. So trying to probe or trying to understand if we can actually image, single neurons at in a volume, and trying to do 3D imaging, something going beyond the 2D standard kind of 2D imaging with the NV centers in near field. What we want to do is understand if we can probe the neurons and in 3D. And this sort of an application will really allow moving forward from the kind of two photon imaging that that exists, where you can only probe a certain layer of the brain. But what we would like to do is make a magnetic sort of a microscope, which will allow us to probe single neurons at with very high precision. So for that, one of the things we realized on the way while we were trying to understand how to do this 3D imaging is that you need to make fast imagers. And as we know, in NV centers, the typical kind of wide field imaging is very static. So it takes several hours to acquire the signal to noise ratio to capture information or spatially resolved information in wide field. So here, what we have very recently shown is that you can actually do that in milliseconds by exploiting, making some technical changes to the magnetic microscope. And we've used, specialized cameras, which are called lock-in detection based cameras, and we can do per pixel lock-in detection. And so what we have recently shown in this paper is actually in arXiv, that you can, this is with a mimic system of like a wire, which we were trying to image the current flowing through the wire. You can actually do this kind of a wide field imaging in milliseconds time scale. And what we envision is to extend now this proof of principle concept into making a cluster of wires and finally mimicking a biological system to be able to image the full biological system, and hopefully be able to show you that you can actually do this 3D imaging. Yeah, so with that, I'll stop and I'll stop sharing and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kasturi. That was very, very interesting. Now I understand why Clarice wanted you to start. Very pedagogical presentation, the relation to medical imaging of quantum sensing that I just overlooked in my introduction, and that's fantastic. I will come back with questions later, relating mostly the discussions with you all. So Clarice, now you are.
Thank you. Now, thank you, Kasturi. You helped me. So I like to call myself a quantum engineer. This means that I build apparatuses to study and control things that are so small and so well controlled, so well separated from their environment, that they're better described by the laws of quantum mechanics, as opposed to the laws of classical mechanics that rule everything big around us. And like Kasturi, I'm also trained in the field of technological quantum sensing. And as she mentioned, we can actually there's a whole body of mathematical proofs that you can employ to show that if you use a quantum object as a sensor, your measurement is improved. In other words, the sensor quantumness enhances the measurement. It turns out very interestingly that there are some, in the same way that there is this wonderful electronic spin in diamond that works as a technological quantum sensor at room temperature and under noisy environments. In the same way that there are such things actually already happening in nature, there are biological materials that whose spins also have the exact same properties. So in fact, there are spins inside proteins that have uncanny similarities to the spins of the nitrogen vacancy center, and that seem to be performing in nature functions such as magnetic field sensing. So this whole discussion of quantum biology started with birds. Okay, I really don't care about birds, but that's where everything started. So it's been known since the 60s that birds, when they migrate, that they use the magnetic field of the Earth at least as a partial cue. And the magnetic field of the Earth is smaller than the magnetic field that you sense when you bring your cell phone close to your head. So how might they be doing this? So the idea is that, and that's the theory that's still standing, is that they might be using a type of spin-dependent chemical reaction. So spin-dependent chemical reactions exist, have been known to exist for decades now too. And here's what happens. There is a certain chemical reaction happening, and then the chemical reaction comes to a crossroads. And then what's happened is that there's a certain spin of interest, and spins are merely quantum mechanical degrees of freedom that do not have classical analogs, right? But they're as fundamental as mass and charge. And a certain electronic spin state determines the fate of the chemical reaction. If the spin has one energy, usually we use, engineers and physicists depict spin with an arrow. If the arrow is up, the chemical reaction continues to one branch. If the spin is down or the arrow is down, the chemical reaction continues through another branch. And importantly, the final products of those two branches are macroscopically different, right? And what you need to know is that magnetic fields can actually influence spin state, so that external magnetic fields can actually influence the branch of the chemical reaction that is taken. So a weak magnetic field, such as the magnetic field of the Earth, might bias this chemical reaction and have macroscopic consequences, and like much further down in time, because this all happens downstream. And birds and organisms in general would sense magnetic fields to the extent that they would sense the different physiological concentrations of products coming from such spin-dependent chemical reactions. So that's birds. But there is a lot of evidence that very recent evidence that points to the fact that the same type of spin-dependent chemical reaction might be way more widespread than just for birds. Right now, there is evidence that important metabolic processes such as respiration rates, glycolysis rates, acidification rates in cells, regeneration, growth in planarias, regulation of the production of reactive oxygen species, yield of DNA repair. There is a lot of evidence that such processes also are regulated by magnetic fields in a spin consistent way. The only problem is that the evidence that exists for those things exists at very disconnected length scales. In test tubes, there is no whatsoever doubt that there are many proteins that are working as bona fide quantum sensors at room temperature. The problem is that the next step in the evidence happens for like whole organisms, whole birds, plates with thousands of cells, and there's nothing in between, right? You cannot unambiguously say that, well, the bird is doing its thing because there's a quantum process occurring inside it. So what can we do? And that's what we're starting to do here at UCLA. We want to bridge those two length scales. To cut a long story short, we are building glorified microscopes with coils, which is basically our version of a quantum sensing experiment that addresses those spin quantum mechanical degrees of freedom in single cells, and then at some point, say, in a couple of cells, in tissues, right? Addressing those spins in biology as if they were, because they are bona fide quantum sensors, right? So what we want to do is the same type of experiment that Kasturi is doing in ENVI centers. We want to do exactly the same thing on the spins in biology. And our goal is to, like, not today, not tomorrow, but maybe in 25 years, maybe we can have the code book on what sort of magnetic field strength, frequency, direction is necessary to drive different, in a deterministic way, different spin-dependent chemical processes, either for technologies or for diagnostics, right, or treatment. So this is what we are starting to do here at UCLA. And this is the end of my short spiel, and I have to end it in the usual way that I end things, but I made a quantum view with you.
Thanks a lot, Clarice, for your enthusiasm also in this amazing field. I with questions. The quantum biology is a field that I follow since the very beginning. I remember in 2008, I was invited also for a roundtable in Harvard University when plenty of crazy stuff was discussed. And I see how you have taken this to a new dimension, and that's quite cool. So Salvatore, I would like to introduce you, but you can start with your absolute amazing stuff in quantum arts. And if you want to show us, Reina was very much interested in seeing how this happens, how such a thing may be possible, and I think we all will enjoy.
Thank you, Kike. I will share the screen. And okay, for example, so it's rather 1 year that I started this activity in using the blockchain technology, and but actually it was since several years before. I see as a lover of quantum physics, of quantum optics, of the wired quantum effects, I was going to think to a way to communicate in some artistic way the magic of quantum physics. So to a broader audience. So as, for example, in this slide, you can see, as pointed out by the physicist Carlo Rovelli, the idea is that quantum mechanics should have an influence on culture, like Copernican revolution did. And so developing such an influence would be a game changer. And we of course, I agree with this view, and which becomes still more important with the development of the new quantum technologies. However, the idea is that in order to be successful in these, probably one has to hack the borders between different disciplines. And art can be very useful to this aim, because it is able to provide deep emotional experiences that can bring links between, also for people that do not know more much about quantum physics. So okay. This is an example. I can show you soon a video. One of our first artwork is just a project called Atomicons. It is in some way the reproduction of the WhatsApp emoji. For example, this is the heart, using the simulation of scanning tunneling microscopy. Here, this is a quantum coral made of 53 atoms, which are positioned in the shape of a heart, and changing the voltage between the sample and the tip. It is possible to see also an animation of this quantum interference. here, what actually these are what we are seeing here, for example, are the electronic waves of free electrons in copper, which are scattered by by impurity atoms on the surface. And this is just a simple example of this project. And beyond, for example, I will go in the next slide. Okay, and here you can see a kind of virtual quantum sculpture, so that people can some way surface the quantum waves of electrons. And this is at some degree, this artwork at some degrees of interactivity. It can be enlarged, can be viewed in real time, can be rotated, and so on. So beyond this project, we move also in collaboration with Kike and with Kipu Quantum, the startup founded by Kike, to use qubits and move to using quantum computers to create artworks. So actually, in this field there are already several artists that are interested in this kind of stuff, that are working with quantum computers, but much of the work is just uses quantum randomness to make some artwork, which at the end is not really identifiable as a quantum artwork. So this is a first pioneeristic example. This animation actually is made with using only 3 qubits. It's just a Wigner function which reproduces the quantum superposition state of this entangled 3 qubits. And this is an example of it also communicates the idea that 3 classical bits, you can just provide the information for a single pixel. And on the contrary, with 3 qubits, with the quantum tomography, you can describe a bit more complex picture. In this case, you can see something like a panda or a seal and so on. I will not go into details. I would like just to speak about. Okay, this is another example which has also been developed in collaboration with Kipu Quantum. It's just a draft, but here you can see several strange faces, while some imaginary being, and also these are Wigner functions. In this case, in the previous case, it was a quantum simulated artwork. This case, each of these phases has been realized with an IBM quantum computer and using the quantum tomography. So this is a quantum tomography with a limited number of shots, so that one can exploit to some degree quantum randomness. Each different image comes from the same quantum state, but partial tomography provides different pictures. And this has also the meaning that so at the end, every time we interact with reality, we see something slightly different because things change, but also we change. And quantum art is able to also to communicate this kind of stuff. So the idea is that not to provide just quantum simulations, but to provide a link between for example, our consciousness, our unconscious thought, human relationships, a link which is made by analogies, just analogies, but between these our world and the magic of quantum physics. I would like just briefly to show our last project, which was very big. We presented an artwork which was at the intersection between art, science, and technologies on a platform in USA of generative art, which is called Art Blocks. And in this generative artwork, this platform allows us to improve, to go one step beyond usual blockchain digital artworks, because it is possible to realize interactive art, so that people can interact with the artworks, and the interaction can provide new images. And also, each of these artworks, here you see the entire collection, which has been sold within a week since its launch, its release in March. And each of these artworks actually is the initial image. These are quantum superposition states simulated in real time. And so the Schrödinger equation has been uploaded in blockchain, and each time you open one of these artworks, you can see real-time quantum evolutions, and you can also interact, determining the collapse of the wave function. If I have time, I would like to just to show you the one of these, so that you can see directly what happens. So I have to shift this one. For example, this is the gallery and of the artworks on the platforms, which is named Art Blocks. And here you would like to show one example. For example, this is a very special edition which displays two entangled images. If I push the space bar, the evolution starts. And this quantum evolution there is no loop. It is the artworks can evolve continuously for hours. And if I interact with one of these two shapes, which are instantaneously, the other one is modified accordingly, and I have a collapse, and it is modified according to the state of the collapsed state of the other one. So, and all is calculated with a real Schrödinger equation, reduced density matrices, all the machinery of quantum physics. However, and so people can experience, for example, entanglement, not in a rather consistent and realistic way. So I can stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Salvatore. That was really cool stuff. There is a common trace in the three presentations for the non-experts. It may be, or even for the experts, I would say, it sounds like totally orthogonal wording and slang, especially technicalities. But there is a common thread, and it is the merge of biological activities that are meant to be an expression of the complexity of a large-scale piling up of matter and light, and the deep and inner structure of the microscopic world described by quantum physics. And that's something that, in my case, because I have worked in several of these related fields, always struck me. I remember that my work is not the goal of this session, but I just wanted to share with you that I had constantly this curiosity about how to relate biological activities and quantum physics. And I did many stuff, some of them honestly totally crazy. One, for example, trying to develop the Darwinian laws of evolution encoded into qubits, and I created the concept of quantum artificial life. And this was the times years ago where people were starting to use the IBM quantum computers in the cloud, and we just went there, and in 5 qubits, we encoded our life, artificial quantum life, and the qubits started to populate, to grow, to reproduce. We had to make the no-cloning theorem. So all this was for us a game. At the end, of course, we said, oh, this could be an intelligent quantum algorithm evolving for a certain purpose. And then we gathered all that. So there is a lot of playful spirit in this. And I wanted to link the 3 speeches with the following reflection. There are, for my personal opinion, 2 crucial and key jumps that we cannot explain as humans, and I hope that at least this century we can grasp. And it is how, starting from the Big Bang through the whole evolution of the universe, the matter started to cool down a little bit and to start to form molecules, atoms, and suddenly something called life based, let's say, in RNA or DNA appeared. Avogadro number of particles self-replicating for creating the first components of life. That's how we jump from just dead matter, as I call it, to something that we call life, beyond any, of course, religious vision, right? So at the real, let's say, fundamental level of physical laws or of biological laws or chemical laws, how this happened. This is a jump from few molecules to complexity that cannot be explained up to now, and that's, for example, where Clarice's work may create wonder, where Kasturi's work may bring also the knowledge of the quantum sensor. But there is a second jump that is, I will take the rest of my life to try to attack, and it's how these now living organisms that without any discrimination, allow me to call it non-intelligent life. At least to our knowledge, there is no consciousness or intelligent process associated. We can call in an anime spirit, oh, this has to be intelligent, but you know what I mean. There is no apparently individuality, consciousness, free will associated to this, mostly laws of quantum physics and biology and chemistry. And then there is a second jump towards what I call intelligent life. That is, let's say, the species, animals, and the human beings, where we are not just happy with the self-reproduction and the preserving the species at the level of the DNA, but we are also doing totally unnecessary things like creating art, creating complexity in cities, in technology, in expression, in education, in civilization, and so on. And that's where the work of Salvatore comes. So there is a very common trace of how we are trying to relate the microscopic quantum aspects with the 2 levels of biological jumps that I have mentioned, that I find fascinating. And I think this is the century where we have to do it. And just that, to finish and to start the question, let me tell you something that is also pretty deep. It is insane, this work of the roundtable today, essentially because everything that is biology at these 2 levels of complexity required millions, in fact, billions of particles, of parts. And we are trying to associate this complexity of the billions of particles with something that is very inherent to the small microscopic world that is quantum physics. And this connection is what our crazy friends and brilliant friends are trying to do. So allow me, Kasturi, if you are still around, to just to follow the speeches, to allow to reflect on what I just said. And what is your vision on this? And because you describe very nicely how you are trying to associate your sensors and your quantum sensors to medical imaging, and how close you are or interested, for example, in the possibility of approaching at room temperature NV centers or quantum sensors to be able to make real-time, let's say, monitoring of brain activity. like following more the direction of what people may call non-invasive brain-computer interfaces, no, like we are developing now.
Yeah, it's actually a very long-term goal, and it's a very hard problem, to be honest, because what is critically limiting us is actually the sensitivity of the device in itself. That is what will give us the advantage to really push it towards in-depth brain imaging. So the current state-of-the-art technology that is available with two-photon imaging, and also the kind of developments that are happening. In fact, every single day I wake up to see a new development in two-photon imaging advances. I think really to keep pace with that, NVs have to really, I think will have to be, amped up a lot more. And therein, I feel that there is a lot of scope, in fact, to be made it as a useful device. So if not a very deep tissue kind of imaging, but even if we want to study, non-invasive technology. So this could be a potential non-invasive technology, unlike the two-photon imaging, or unlike the, the probe kind of imaging, where you actually have to really poke the brain cells, or, open up the skull and really look into the tissues. So I think currently, of course, the technology is very nascent, and what we are trying to do, and some other people in the world are trying to do, are just trying to mimic kind of systems which would mimic the brain, the actual brain cells, and trying to see whether it is even feasible to do like 3D imaging. So so if you think of magnetic imaging technologies, you see everything is 2D. So one of the key ideas is to break that 2D imaging and actually push it towards a 3D technology. So that's the first step. If we can do that, then I think that will really enable, a much faster and quicker development towards, brain imaging, or medical imaging per se.
So the standard NMR techniques that are used today in hospitals and in medicine, you don't call them 3D?
No, they are 3D. So they are different kind of 3D. So the NMR techniques are, or rather MRI kind of techniques are, what they are trying to do is they cannot actually localize the signals. So if you see the functional MRI technique that exists today, so what they do is they put a helmet around the brain, and then they make you listen to music, or do some activity, and then they look at what are the different parts of the brain that are lighting up, but they don't have any resolution. It is 3D, but it's like a cluster. So if you see the fMRI images, you will see that slices of the brain where you will see this part of the brain has showing a blob, which is showing some sort of an activity. It is 3D in that sense, but you don't have the spatial resolution to pinpoint which neuron is actually communicating with which neuron, and then what sequence is the event happening. Is it this part of the brain that is first lighting up, and in that kind of resolution is not there yet. So therefore, one of the things that we would like to do is actually, if you can build sort of a helmet with sensors, and you still have the spatial resolution to pinpoint and locate where the signals are traveling, where is it located? That is what we are trying to understand. Can we pinpoint the location of the origin of a signal when you're doing a certain activity? So that's what we are trying to, focus and extend. And however, it's a very futuristic, sort of a thing to do, because we are really trying to understand it in mimicked systems like coils, magnetic, current carrying coils, which will mimic like a current carrying, signal, which is a neuronal signal essentially. So trying to mimic the properties of a neuronal signal with fabricated devices, and then seeing whether if you build a very complex structure, can we actually pinpoint and understand where is the signal originating? Can we really, that's essentially the
fantastic. Right. Yeah. So the resolution issue,
yes,
is crucial if you want to make meaningful description of the inner communication behavior of the neurons in the brain, which then the MRI are yes, just very, let's say, pretty noisy and macro picture. Okay, wonderful. I have plenty of questions that we will keep moving. Clarice, you wanted to comment and criticize strongly what I said. I saw you. But
No. Yes, I
no,
don't want to criticize. I want to
no,
add
no,
data
just kidding.
points. Okay, go for it.
I would create some tension here because discussion has to be passionate. So let me ask you, I heard your stuff and it's really amazing. As I said, I consider myself a witness of this field of quantum biology. When I joined this 2008 meeting in Harvard, there were very, very interesting discussions. You know very well the prejudices, especially at that time, of the people. And given that
it continues. It continues. The
it
prejudice is
continues.
still
Okay,
there.
so you will tell us. You will tell us. But at that time, I remember that the quantumness of the observations, in particular for FMO molecule and the avian compass was there. And I remember that I was in the round table as a neutral, let's say, expert. And I raised a question that I just passed to you now, and you can develop as you want. And it was the fact that people said that they had experimental evidence of the quantumness and so on. And I just shared with them a view that comes essentially from quantum optics, because I saw also this at times where the community was saying to prove that the result of an experiment is quantum, it's not enough that you need a quantum model to describe what you observe. You have to prove that there is no possible classical model that predicts the same. It was the times of Dave Wineland and Serge Laroche works that led to the Nobel Prize in 2012. And, you know, the quantum optics community was also extremely criticized. And, you know, it was not enough to show that your modeling was quantum and that you observed things. That people said, no, if I have in the mind a classical model or a semi-classical model, and I can predict the same. That was the debate. And in that 2008 Harvard meeting, also we had a similar discussion. And now I hear that you are talking about plenty of other stuff, which looks amazing. And you are harnessing the problem directly, saying, I put my coils, I'm going to prove that these cells behave like that, it's spin-dependent chemical reactions and so on. That's absolutely a game changer with respect to the trends. And I let you develop a little bit on that.
So I do think that the experiments that currently exist in the realm of quantum biology, they're just not enough to unambiguously either prove or refute that quantum effects are happening in biology, right? So this is what we want to do with our experiments. We want to, in the same experiment, look at spin signals in the same way that Kasturi looks at her envy centers using optically detected magnetic resonance, and seeing like how the way that we prepare our spins has consequences downstream for a cell using regular fluorescence microscopy in very controlled ways, right? I do not think that we're ever going to be able to establish an absolute chain of consequences, but I think we need to be able in the same experiment to do quantum readout of the spins and then biological consequences, right? I think that this needs to happen. And if you will, the language that I usually use to talk about what the type of platform that we're developing is like, we want to do light matter interaction where matter is biomatter, right? And this is a key point that is missing. And I think it's important to say that the prejudice is still there, right? Like there's tons of money today for quantum research, but this that I'm describing is not considered quantum research. And NIH is the National Institutes of Health, is the people in the US who fund like health science related things. A program officer from NIH told me these exact words: the NIH is not ready for quantum bio. Then the National Science Foundation that funds basic science, sometimes when you place an interdisciplinary proposal, it goes through like through panels. You need to please two different sets of people, which is like the multiplication of small probabilities, right? So there's a lot of prejudice, right? And I just want to give a little bit of food for thought. Like, I mean, if you have homogeneous decision makers, you're going to end up with homogeneous research pursuits. Right now, I think there's a clearly defined, like, oh, what's worthwhile to do in quantum, right? And I think that's very exciting. Quantum research gets passed just because historically it's not a thing. But before I end, I need to add those two data points to your discussion, because I think they're extremely interesting, right? So going back to what you said just a couple of minutes ago, I don't know anything about like the origin of life or how life started, but I think there's very cool things that I think nature might be using quantum mechanics to function. For example, if you see, so historically things started with birds and the proteins in birds that can sustain those spin-dependent chemical reactions. So for historical reasons, that's the protein that has been the most studied. And you can actually model the spin phenomena happening inside this protein in a very, I mean, crappy way. Even for me, I can model this as an experimentalist, but then my theory colleagues do much better models. But you can start modeling those spin phenomena and making predictions. So simulations of the magnetosensitivity of the protein in birds that putatively make them magnetosensitive, magnetosensitivity as a function of magnetic field strength. The first thing that you see in the simulation is that this curve is not monotonic, it goes up and down at about 10 times the magnetic field of the Earth, which is still very tiny. The magnetosensitivity has gone down, which is expected because this type of chemical reaction is the stuff of very small magnetic fields on the order of what's emitted by our phone. And very interestingly, this curve peaks very close to the magnetic field of the Earth, which is either a coincidence or it shows that there has been some sort of evolutionary pressure. I mean, in my lab, we cannot decide, but we think that people who do, for example, directed evolution of proteins could help check if proteins respond to such evolutionary pressure. So this is the one thing I wanted to tell you. The second thing is another way that nature seemed to be using spins to function in a crazy way and in a way that is not well understood at all. There's this effect called chiral-induced spin selectivity, and it's the coolest thing that nobody has ever heard about. So it was discovered in 2011, and the idea is that if you have electrons being transported through nanochiral structures, and now people are actually developing materials that exacerbate this effect, but it was first discovered in DNA. If you have electrons being transported through peptides or DNA helices or proteins, which are chiral, right? People have found out, like in chemical experiments, that the electrons going in one way have a certain spin preference at room temperature, and electrons going the other way have the opposite spin preference. And depending on the material, you have crazy spin polarizations of like 40%, 60%, 90%, 10%. And for the people who have a background in quantum computing, this is akin to like a qubit initializer, right? And initializing qubits is not something that comes easy in a quantum computer. There's all sorts of like protocols that you need to employ for that to happen. And nature seems to be using that. And actually, it was just shown by someone at the University of Southern California that electron transport in a bacteria nanowire, it's like a chain of cytochromes, it doesn't matter. But electron transport in a bacteria nanowire is also spin polarized, which gives rise to all sorts of like crazy questions, right? I mean, we have plenty of electrons being transported in our mitochondria and stuff. Is it the same stuff or not? So there are crazy things that nature seems to be using. And I mean, and I know it doesn't help like solve the question of how life started, but it's pretty exciting.
Wow, wow! I learned a lot. Yeah, I like also your transparency on the critical aspects of the field, but and your description of how funding is producing this strong bias. We have all suffered this the blah 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 of interdisciplinarity, but the pragmatic approach is that you go to a panel and say, no, these are the physics, this is the biology, and this is the quantum computing. Ah, no, sorry, your application is too interdisciplinary. And so the question is, we are promoting interdisciplinarity, but we are not welcoming interdisciplinarity. And we have all suffered that many times. So much, without mentioning European high-level institutions, that the top, let's say, leaders of the evaluation told us in private, honestly, don't be so interdisciplinary, because this complicates our life so much that it will be rejected, right? So, but the headlines are interdisciplinary. So that's life. But Clarice, these fields that like the ones you are leading and boosting worldwide need people like you, with this character, with this proactive, this passion.
But it gets very lonely.
No. You are here with your friends, and I tell you from my let's say experience as evaluator, director of institutes and everything, that the sentence that I heard you, the sentence that convinced me that this is the way to go, is when you said, what we are doing is the fundamentals of quantum physics in the relation of light-matter interactions. And you said, where we want that the matter, I will say it in my language, is not that matter, like atoms and molecules, it has to be living matter. I hear that, and I just give you the millions of dollars for your research immediately, right? It is really the way to go. So it makes so much sense that we have to put this quantum sensing and developments to see how light interacts with matter and to explore the quantums there. It's so obvious. You see, there is nothing wrong. The atoms and the molecules of that matter are also there in living matter. Right? There is no secret, right? So that's really amazing. So we will be back to that. So Salvatore, it is your time now. Salvatore has shown us an amazing set of plots and figures combining this blockchain with these NFT artworks. I have heard wonderful descriptions like Wigner functions, such as people that are non-expert. Wigner functions are just formally phase-space representations, pseudo-probability representations that guarantee or can guarantee that something is quantum in light in particular. And it was such experiments of these Wigner functions that led to the Nobel Prize that I mentioned of 2012 to Dave Wineland and Serge Haroche, two great friends who developed that. I contributed also to the development of that. And Salvatore has been using them to express an aesthetic vision of quantum. Salvatore, let me tease you a little bit, because you are the world expert, on something that I constantly say and said. I will be provocative here, and everybody can react, and you can also overreact if you want. I was telling to many people in some interviews, saying, when I see a beautiful landscape, I'm seeing now a beautiful landscape, clouds, sun, and people say, oh, that's beautiful. Fine. If you wake up and you are sad and depressed, you may say, okay, I don't like it. Fine. Also, it's an expression of you like it or you don't like it, right? But I insist that when you see something beautiful, aesthetically beautiful in the landscape, I claim that this is not art. And the reason is because for me, art requires an artist. And with all the respect, when I see people saying, look, from this Fermilab experiment or this great work, appear this particles, that's art. I raised the hand and I said, sorry, that's beautiful, but that's not art. Right? Essentially, because for me, art requires an artist. And what is an artist? Is an intelligent, we come back to the topic, right? At least a certain level of intelligence. At this point of life, for me, when I say intelligence can be human or can also be artificial, you know, very soon the robots and algorithms may be doing that, but I need somebody that declares itself, says, I am minimally conscious, I need to express aesthetics, you know, and I'm going to use this raw material to express a certain aesthetic concept, and then I create that. Then the people observe that, they say, okay, this is the artwork, there is an artist, I like it or I don't like it. But things just appear in there as a consequence of physical, chemical, biological processes that look beautiful, I don't consider it as an art. How you frame that, Salvatore, now that you are leading worldwide with your association IncyBART and all your work, because you are telling us, guys, art is not just emerging by chance there. You know, there can be an artist, we can be making algorithms, we discard things, we create, we use all the tools, and we are creating something that we are sure is quantum, is coming from quantum computers, and this is new for the world. How you see this concept?
So essentially, I fully agree with you, and what you say, that it seems that people in a cautious way agree with you and follows what you say. I mean, for example, in blockchain, you can see a number of physicists that minted real quantum simulations, cool quantum simulations. For example, there are beautiful images from quantum chaos simulations. I like these, but they just put the output of the simulation of which provides some cool image, and they try to sell this. But this actually at the end seems that is not working, and these creations are almost completely unsolved. So in some way, people perceive your view. So, and also I would add that in contemporary art is the Umberto Eco, which was a very famous writer and also philosopher and so on, expert of aesthetics, an Italian famous writer. And he was using it to say that actually there was some analogy between contemporary art and quantum mechanics, in the sense that there is some kind of indeterminacy principle, in the sense that like quantum mechanics, contemporary art is relational. So there is a relation between the system, which is the artwork, and the observer. And so there is not a deterministic way. So the observer, the concept of art comes from this relationship. And so this means, for example, if you see a beautiful landscape or a beautiful scientific image where there is no aim in the artist, it seems that, and you can still say, okay, this is for me, this is art, but because it comes, the art is in this case created by just the observer. But in a full artistic process, there is such a relationship between the creator or the artwork and the observer. So I like to this fundamental quantum concept. So, for example, according to Carlo Rovelli, which is trying to merge general relativity with quantum mechanics. So the reality that we perceive is relational, and in some way the contemporary art goes exactly in this way. So from one side, it is an artwork has to have some degrees of freedom, so that the observer can have his own, can build his own reality, can have his own view, personal view, and this make the things more interesting, more richer. But essentially, I fully agree with your view. It is not enough to have beautiful images from, for example, microscopy or scientific simulations. This is not art.
Excellent. So, you know, people, Rina wants to make a comment here or a question. I just want to close this small part of Salvatore saying that I have teased Salvatore many times, and we have discussed many times. You know, I have been, the first time I saw Van Gogh in the Tate Modern Museum in London, or a spectacular exhibition in Boston, you know, when I saw my favorite art, sometimes I put my knee on the floor, literally, you know, like say, man, what an expression of beauty. And what Salvatore is trying to make is that very soon we may go to a museum, to a quantum museum, you know, and the observation will not only be an exchange of macroscopic emotions, but we will be entangled with the artwork, literally, you know, and we will be collapsing the wave functions and creating the art in the same moment that we are observing. That's unique. As crazy as Kasturi and Clarice's work, you know, is absolutely a revolution. So Rina, I let you comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. So I had actually questions for earlier discussions as well, and then I'll comment a little bit on the art side. So one of the questions that I had, Clarice, for you is that given the impact that the low magnetic field has on the cells of human beings as well, and sort of, you know, with the evolutionary pressure that you talked about, when we talk about all of these space programs, and I think you and I have discussed this in the past, that, you know, when we're discussing all these space programs, this should be one of the top things that should be actually discussed in terms of the kind of impact human beings are going to face when they do long-term space travel, or when they live on a base in Mars or Moon and stuff like that. So I want to understand whether the space industry is engaging people like you in those conversations or not.
No, they're not. No,
Okay.
they're not. I've been trying.
Right? Which is kind of crazy, right? Because
Rina, do I have the time to tell the story that I think I told you about the tadpoles?
Very quickly.
Okay,
I think it's an interesting.
very quickly.
And people like Rohini are here, and Kasturi. I think it's important to have that story so that we really understand what the impact can be. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, so I have a friend whose job is to build hypomagnetic chambers. He's a bona fide cold matter physicist. He builds hypomagnetic chambers and he shoves in like cold atom experiments, right? Inside his chambers, he has noise levels of about 1 nanotesla, where the magnetic field of the Earth is about 50 microtesla. He started hearing those things about, oh, magnetic fields in biology. So here's what he did. He grew tadpoles for 2 days, which was as long as he could go without asking for a bio license, under 2 conditions. Inside his hypomagnetic chambers. In one, he put a weak magnetic field mimicking the magnetic field of the Earth, and the tadpoles were okay. And in the other condition, he just grew the tadpoles for 2 days under this 1 nanotesla residual field. The tadpoles with the mimicked magnetic field were okay, but the tadpoles under the nanotesla residual field, about 30% were macroscopically deformed, which is really crazy because, well, first of all, because you're not even putting a magnetic field, you're taking away a tiny magnetic field, weaker than the magnetic field of your cell phone, right? And you know, I mean, and given the fact that the magnetic fields are so small, everyone's best guess is that this is probably spin related, and this, as Rina was saying, opens up all sorts of like Pandora box questions, right? So what's the magnetic field in Mars? Can we grow lettuce in Mars? Can we reproduce in Mars? What's the magnetic field that astronauts sense in if they are to go through multi-generational missions? right? So this is quite cool. And this experiment has been reproduced now by a group in Mainz and a group in Tufts University in the US.
All right. So I think I wanted to bring up that point, and I think there's a need to connect people in quantum biology to the space industry, even if it is for just validation of what is really required. With that, I'll keep quiet in the interest of time. And Rohini, you have any questions? Shyam, you have any questions?
No, I think just really fascinating. And I mean, there's just possibilities in terms of sort of evolution, in terms of just so many possibilities, long-term questions, open questions, fundamental questions, as well as clearly the more applied questions. I mean, I think and the other discussion we were having here was about the interdisciplinary nature of some of these problems, right? I think to me, that's hearing that from Clarice is actually quite concerning, because I thought that at least in the area of computational biology and some of those genetics and neurosciences, etc., some of that is getting more acceptable, but perhaps I'm being too optimistic. But no, great learning. I don't have any specific question at this point.
So Rohini, I had written a book long ago where I talked about thought integrators. In fact, my podcast series is called the same. And the concept of the thought integrators is around people who have reasonable amount of depth in multiple subjects. So, but we still call them like these wide knowledge people. And then of course, there are experts who have really deep. And around 10 years ago, when I wrote that book, I said that the future depends on these people. These people who have some depth in multiple subjects, because they can then be the reviewers for something like this, and say, yeah, this makes sense, therefore money should be given for investment, or
20 to 40% year on year. So the pressure that the fund managers are under is extremely intense. So even if you're a deep tech investor, which is what we are, we can only come in when there is some clarity on the market uptake. So at least you need to be able to show market metrics for any deep tech company, which will at least grow at some reasonable level year on year. You need to see revenues grow at some reasonable rate. Only then you will be able to get the kind of follow-on investors and all of that stuff which you have to show, which are the metrics on the basis of which a fund is evaluated. So the venture industry works under, the capital market there is only so much money, and every fund manager is fighting to get access to that capital. And the only metric on which you are gauged is the return you have provided. So we have no other metric of being gauged. What is your annual return that you have given your investors? So everything boils down to that end of the day. It's a purely commercial decision based on returns. They don't care about anything else, the investors who put money into funds like us. So naturally, we have to play where the potential for market uptake is closest. So in the case of quantum, whenever in India, for example, we have only so many startups. Hopefully that will evolve over time and you'll see more startups. But even when they come in, it may start in security, for example, quantum security, or some of those areas where maybe there is a chance for uptake that is faster. And that growth is what will bring other investors into the space. So what you really need are some initial successes commercially for these companies, which will then attract other investors to take slightly riskier bets.
Right.
So, it grows on that. You've got to have the commercial successes in the beginning.
So here we have a case, and just because we are on the last minutes, Rina always raises these issues in our roundtables, and I like it a lot. This is India quantum ecosystem, right? We have a top CTO from Microsoft India. We have a top investor like Shyam, Rina moving the quantum ecosystem. So, and three wonderful experts. So what could be, let's say, quantum sensors from Kasturi, quantum biology from Clarice, and quantum arts from Salvatore in the Indian market, in the Indian ecosystem, in the Indian academic world investment? And I tell you this because I see important boost and developments in diversity, as I said. I get bored when people think that a country should just do quantum computing, only one model of quantum computing, and that's all, right? There is a wide now between neuromorphic computing, quantum computing, artistic expression, metaverse, quantum metaverse, brain-computer interfaces, sensing, medical imaging. So how do you see these three fields of our guests today as driving within India? Any hint on that, Rina and Shyam?
So I believe that today quantum, while we are trying to reach out to funds as well, like Shyam, and therefore Shyam is here. But I do believe that slightly other forms of investments and a little bit of creativity is required. So for example, where the risk is higher and the long-term return is going to be a little longer term than is expected by typical funds, I think that's where the angel investors, high net value investors are likely to come in, because some of them, they are passionate about running after something. A good example is, the international example that stands out is Tesla. At the time when Tesla was started, I don't believe any single VC fund would have backed it.
Yeah, nobody
There was
came.
no market. There was no market, right? The market was created by Tesla. So similarly, I think the same stands true for a lot of the work in the quantum space. The other untraditional approach, I believe, is, which is why we want to do the science fiction one, is we want to create interest and excite the masses. And I see a little interesting thing on the quantum art side. I don't know if somehow we can create something there which could be useful for Bollywood. I'm sure a lot of the current Bollywood, producers and directors are experimenting with the technology in a very big way now. And even I know, if you look at Hyderabad, here there is a huge business. There is a big focus here on all things virtual world, right? So the metaverse is very big in Telangana right now. So, and there's a lot of experimentation happening for that with the media industry. So now, if there is something, so anything that we can do to spark imagination, right, in a bigger way, that will help us catch those high net worth investors also. Because it's very difficult to explain quantum at the grassroots level to the high net worth investor. But if we can spark imagination and do some explaining, I think we have a better bet. That's what I think.
We will invite you because Salvatore and other teams are going to make presentations in technical museums, in festivals of metaverse, and that's something that we will send you links for exploring the possibility with Hollywood. And Rina I like a lot the reaction of Rina, who is also a very enthusiastic person when I mentioned the story of quantum arts, and she said, yeah, but we have a session of quantum science fiction, and then we realized that there are two sides. One thing is to say, I make films, conventional films on science fiction about quantum, but another thing is to use quantum computing to create those films, right? Which is more or less the game changer. And I would like just to close the session with a reflection that I would love to see Kasturi's quantum sensors used for light living matter interactions transform into quantum arts with Salvatore. That's truly interdisciplinary, and I really regret that the system is not taking this interdisciplinarity as it should. But guys, keep it moving. You have our trust and our support, and thanks to Rina, to Shyam, because these are the kind of places where we can express ourselves and boost our stuff. So be sure that the Indian quantum ecosystem can welcome these three views and these three people. And we are very glad, and thanks for your attention also.
So I have a request before we leave. Thank you very much, Professor Solano, for driving the session today. The request that I have is that based on today's session, I'm just observing that this might be a very useful session to share with the public. Would that be okay with everyone? Yeah. All right.
Okay.
If that is, then we're going to get it edited and shared. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
Thank you
thanks-
very much. Thank you.
all.
And it was great to catch up, Clarice.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
And Rina, I read Project Hail Mary that you recommended.
Oh, you did? How did you find it?
I did. I loved it. So you recommended it to me. Sorry. Right? Didn't
Yeah,
you
yeah.
recommend it to me?
Yes, yes.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Yeah. Good night.